that are probably transferable to feedback and communication and coaching with this audience. I will say that what I will share today is pulled from several different resources and best practices into a certain style that I use and leverage. And I think all of you will develop your own style and more how you're comfortable with, but these are some really great best practices. So as Amanda shared, I'm a regional director for Oregon State University Extension Service, and I'll share a little bit about my position so I can provide context to our communication. But first and foremost, I thought it's most important to go over the objectives today. So I asked Amanda to help identify some learning objectives, and I would say I got a pretty lengthy list. And so I distilled those down into 3 main points of topics. And so I'm not overwhelming you, we're going to take a deep dive. So first and foremost, as participants of this workshop, our focus is going to be on understanding the importance of shared values and trust within a group when providing and receiving feedback and addressing conflict. Okay. The second is gaining strategies on how to provide feedback and address conflict effectively. And last but not least, we're going to spend some time talking about inclusive communication, and this really will be embedded through our presentation as we go about. And I'll share a couple tips and tricks and resources that I use that are fairly comprehensive that might be applicable in the work that you all do. Does that sound good? I am going to share a little bit about my role in the institution that I work for. So as a regional director for the Extension Services, we have educational-based information that is developed at the university, and we have the opportunity through OSU Extension Service Districts to share that within the communities that we represent. So I provide leadership and oversight for that kind of tan color in the bottom, which is Douglas, Jackson, Josephine, Klamath, and Lake counties. In my work, I supervise about 32 employees when we're fully staffed, but there are about 87 during peak times of the summer OSU Extension employees. And so I spend a great deal of time in my role as a supervisor doing feedback and professional and coaching of employees. And so that's really where I'm at, is I spend a lot of time in this world of coaching and providing feedback. A lot of the information that I'll share today is based in some HR best practices as well. So I understand that this group is probably very dynamic, where there's a lot of peer-to-peer relationships. There may be some people who are team leads or supervisors as well. So I want to definitely have some scenarios and conversations about those different types of roles and how power dynamic may shift the language and tone and how we approach situations too. I also represent a very diverse workforce. As far as understanding, when we are working in rural America, cultural beliefs look very different, and the values of our constituents and stakeholders sometimes do not align with the values of our institution. So I do a lot of work in the realm of trying to find common ground and shared values between institutions and the people that we serve. So I shared a little bit about our mission and then our values and Extension. And we are community-based, we're accountable, responsive, respect diversity, and as far as our partnerships. And so our shared values are really important as we move through this work and have these conversations. So I want to take just a brief moment here for everyone to take a few moments and really reflect on the shared values of your institution and organization. And I'm so thankful that we were able to do a little bit deeper diving, and Amanda was able to coordinate and make sure that we had this information, because your organization has already done a lot of foundational work to have these conversations and dive deeper because of your value system. And I'm going to take just a quick moment and make sure in the chat folder. I saved these as a PDF so I can upload them. And if you'd have an opportunity, because we're going to use these through a couple different scenarios through the organization. Let's see here. My computer's being a little bit slow, so I won't push it. I might go back. Ooh. There we go. And so you should have a PDF of this document too, so you can have that handy. And so there's two different pages. One is based on respect and the other one on shared values. So that should be downloaded. You can I get a thumbs up if you've seen that? It's hit you. Perfect. Thank you all. So I'm going to share a little bit. So something personally about me, and I think this is really applicable to the work that we're doing. So this is Morgan, and Morgan is my 14-year-old daughter. So raising a teenage girl is a very, very special experience. Morgan is a really high-functioning teenager. She is involved in a lot of different activities. She's very accountable. I would say in the most loving way, a little high-strung. By a little, I would probably mean a lot high-strung. Like if you are supposed to pick her up at 4:45 and it's 4:46, you will be texting, "Where are you?" And I find it a little, and we've had a lot of conversations about this, is a little bit of a struggle because we have two different ways that we move through the world. And so we have to find common ground. One of the things that makes me very different from Morgan is that I suffer from severe optimism. I am very optimistic. I think the best of situations, and I always first believe that if something's happening, somebody had the best of intentions. Morgan, on the other hand, is very pessimistic and critical. Not only is she critical on herself, which as a high achiever, that is fairly common, but she transfers her critical frame as she moves through the world also to other people. And it's hard for me and emotionally draining that she moves from maybe healthy venting to ranting at times. And a lot of times that ranting is directed towards teachers. It is directed towards volunteers, whether it is in the 4-H program that she's a member of or volunteer coaches, and she's in a lot of athletics and sports. However, she is really, quite honestly, when she's moving through the world with her teammates, with her coaches, with her teachers, her performance and information that's provided back from us is like very positive. So this is really something that is, if you're super in her inner circle or at home, like she moves into this world of venting and ranting and not so optimistic. And she would, when I would push back a little bit with the conversations and trying to frame them with her, she would share that I was trying to change her views and wasn't allowing for her to share how she felt. Which, okay, I definitely understand. But then at the same time, it was so emotionally draining for me to hear her complaining and ranting that it really made our relationship very, very challenging. And also my partner, he works in the school system. And so he's an educator. He is also a coach. And so a lot of times she would be talking about, in a negative way, his work colleagues. And it wasn't positive, and there wasn't anything that's really positive coming from the conversation. So eventually we had to come up with some common expectations of how we talked. And it has been helpful. And some of you may have really heard this before. It's like, as you're trying to think about communicating with people, is it kind, is it true, and is it necessary? And so that's how we've been working with Morgan to really frame things. So is it something that's kind? And in a positive way, how can we approach this? And is it true? There's a lot of gossip that goes around a little rural school. And I think that there's a lot of life skills in learning, like, how do we ensure that what we are talking about and sharing is actually true and we're not spreading gossip? And then I grayed out, is it necessary? Because that one to me is a little ambiguous. All right, because at the same point in time as we're having dinner time conversation and learning about each other's day, like, maybe, is it necessary? Is it really that important? But really, is it kind and is it true? Is really where we value the conversation that we're having in our household. However, I really use these terms as I move through the world, and also as I take up space. I ask myself, not only is it kind and is it true, but also is it necessary? Like, what is the value added to that conversation? And so we visit with that with Morgan, and so she learns those life skills. And we talked about the way of how we can reframe things to be positive, and we are not having conversations with people who immediately shut down and open up those doors, and how that's a life skill. So this has been really, really helpful. And even just on Friday, she was complaining about a teacher. And all I had to say to Morgan, I'm like, Morgan, is this kind and true? And she's like, oh, wait a minute. Okay. And then she thought, she's like, oh, never mind. And so it was something that she completely stopped. And it's been really, really, really helpful in our family situation. That is not what I wanted. Hold on. So many screens. Okay. Awesome. Are you still seeing my screen that says your shared values? Okay, perfect. So where I really want to take a little bit of time and spend is for us to consider, how can you lean on your shared values to really shift your culture and communication within your organization, in a similar approach to how, as the example with my family, is we've really shifted to ensuring that our conversation is kind and is true, and at times necessary, but that's not a priority for us always. And really, how you could see you using your values of the organization to shift your conversations that you have. So I'm going to take a quick pause here. See if people have ideas. And you can popcorn share those out. You can put them in chat, whatever works best for you.
I think that trust is a big one at our organization, because what we do matters a lot to our survivors and our clients, but we are only one person each, and so we have to lean on each other a lot and trust that people know what they're doing and are doing what they're supposed to be doing. But I also think it comes into play when people are on their own and they're trying to make their best decision, and maybe they're not trusting that it's okay to make mistakes, or trusting that it's okay to ask for help. So I think it's something that we excel at, but also something that could be better as well.
I think that I was thinking about that too, Kristen, and I think it comes in with support too. Yeah, I see Jessica, a similar thing too, like encouraging a supportive culture, and not that allows for mistakes and doesn't, lead to people gossiping or talking about people's mistakes in a way that's negative or whatever, so that we can maintain that support and trust in each other.
I also see the growth aspect of it. We're constantly learning in this field. Like there is no down and comfortable time for experiences. So yeah, we use a lot of that.
Awesome. I think those are all fantastic. Responsiveness, supportive. I liked sharing about you're always learning, and working for an institution too. We a lot of times fall back on, all right, we're a learning organization, and so that's like, how do we move forward from this? That's very, very true. And I appreciate the respect part and building trust too. I saw that as one of your values, as well as like knowing that people might have to work independently, and then assuming positive intent is, I think something too before going to judgment, is making sure like, okay, like my colleague did the best that they could with the information they had at the time. Like I respect them, I value them, and I trust that they did the best that they had. I have had the opportunity, and I'm going to show a couple examples too, and just provide you some clarification, or not clarification, just maybe some resources on what happens if you see a colleague perhaps that is doing something that you feel does not align with your shared values, whether that be in a group meeting or a one-on-one conversation. Share a couple different items here too. So one of the things that we had to call to action to visit about, if you see something, and how do you provide, or if you see maybe an action or behavior, and how do we make sure that we realign with our shared values? And one of the things that I like to use as I'm coaching employees, that if there is perhaps language that doesn't align with our values, or an action that doesn't align with our values, simply asking the employee or my colleague, how does blank reflect our shared values or support our shared values? And I've used this quite often, even if someone has maybe a professional development experience that they want to be a part of for work, but perhaps doesn't align with the shared values, or their position description is really not necessarily implying my values or thoughts, but really asking them those deeper questions of, how does this align with our shared values? Now, this could only be if something you feel is going awry and not representing your shared values, but this also could be a good reflection exercise that if you're planning, let's say, an outreach event or a supporting survivors in a new way, and you're making a plan, is taking that pause and ensuring that this moving forward ensures your shared values. The other thing too is, if you're in a group conversation, if you're in a group meeting and you feel like those topics are moving away, and the dialogue is moving away from your shared values, it's maybe making a quick timeout and sharing, you think you may be straying from your shared values, can we take a moment to review those? And I really, really want to call attention to this, because this really will support how we provide feedback in a little bit and we go through an exercise. But also, it's just a great exercise because you all have really some fantastic shared values. And so whether those are printed out and laminated, they're in your meeting rooms, or you have them written down on business cards or on your slides as you start meetings, it's just really calling your attention and always coming back to your shared values, which will help guide your organization and provide feedback. All right, so as we talk about feedback, I'm going to pause here. We're talking about feedback. There is an image on the screen. Can you share how those two things might be connected, or what you may have heard in the past about feedback and the image? Awesome. Yeah. So the compliment sandwich, sometimes people call it like the Oreo cookie. And it is an adage where we would take a positive feedback, the negative feedback, which is really the meat of what we're trying to provide someone, then sandwiched with another positive impact or a positive feedback. And really, the research will show that we should move away from this way of giving feedback because it's often viewed as unauthentic to the individual receiving that because we're like, well, like, all right, they're a little bit confused because they feel like maybe you're making up those positive affirmations or feedback in order to deliver the negative feedback or the critique or criticism at that point in time. And it's confusing. Really, what the research will show is that we should be giving that positive reinforcing feedback when things take place. And so don't hold on to those positive things, really separate those out. You may have also heard of, like, let's praise in public, but critique in private. And so this kind of makes it a little bit unique when we're doing it this way, and it gets a little bit messy. So even though it might feel easier than just giving someone negative feedback, I'm going to show a different strategy for that. It's the old way of thinking, and the research really shows us that there's a better way to give that feedback in a more direct and respectful way. Here, okay. So a lot of this is built upon something called feed forward. And instead of feedback and providing feed forward to how do we move forward through this content? This is a book, Feedback Fix, and the author there, Joe, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce his last name, is a really fantastic book. I first learned about feed forward through a podcast that I listened to, and then Joe was a guest on that podcast, and then subsequently I did get that book, and I found it very, very helpful in providing feedback and coaching to employees. So one of the things that we talk about is how do we hold up a mirror and have the individual employee reflect on their own versus us imposing our own values and telling someone how to fix the situation. And instead of a sandwich, they devised a mechanism called WRAP. And so that means what and where, reason, effect, and prompt. And this is a way that I have definitely moved through the world to provide feedback instead of that sandwich approach. And I'll show that a little bit in action. So I'm going to talk about a scenario here, which I would think would be a common experience within the work that you do, and there's a lot of applicability. And then I'm going to provide you all of some scenarios on how to apply this that are applicable to the work that you do too. Okay, so WRAP. I will first share a little bit of a scenario that has actually taken place, but I will change people's names just to protect those individuals. So in the 30 plus people that I supervise, I'm going to tell you a story about Sam and Alex. So Alex and Sam are both employees in the same office in Southern Oregon. They both work in the same kind of college department as each other, and very, very close colleagues that have worked well together for a number of years. Through COVID, Alex has chosen new preferred pronouns. And Alex, previous to when we're all working in the office together, preferred pronouns were she, her. And within the last 6 months to a year, has moved through their preferred pronouns are now they, them. And has been shared a little bit in a passive way because we are working remotely and we are not necessarily in the same office, and Alex has continued to work remotely. And the information regarding preferred pronouns has really only been in an email signature, but not necessarily shared in a more formal way. Their coworker, Sam, has, within a recent meeting that was held kind of in a hybrid format, was virtually and in person, defaults to using Alex's previous preferred pronouns as she, her. And at the first time, I supervised both employees, which makes sometimes conversations a little bit easier because I have that direct line of report to both of them. That Sam had communicated in an email using the previous preferred she, her in the previous preferred pronouns. And I thought, okay, like it was just a communication to me. A lot of times we're like dealing with muscle memory and what that looks like. However, when we were in a full staff meeting, that was the hybrid format, Sam used the previous she, her instead of they, them preferred pronouns. And as I was looking on the Zoom meeting, I could see a few people be a little, they were not as comfortable, particularly because we did have pronouns listed as they are now. And then I thought, well, okay, this warrants a conversation. And so I took Sam aside and visited with Sam. And I said, hey, Sam, I have some feedback to provide you. And a lot of times when someone's like, okay, feedback, is this good? Is this bad? What does this look like? And your heart kind of gets racing. So the important part of the first thing that I told Sam is what it was in regards to. So you narrow the scope, and I said, hey, I was at that staff meeting, and during that time, I recognized that you had used she, her instead of they, them for Alex. And they're like, okay, I did. And then I moved just into their narrowing the scope. And so now we're just really focused on. And it was pretty immediate feedback. I didn't allow this to go on a month or two, or for things to escalate and go further. And so I think that's always really important within feedback, because sometimes you give information to someone, they're like, well, someone should have just told me. So clear is kind. Reason. So then I linked back in that conversation with Sam, shared what took place, and then linked back saying, Sam, I know you're a team player, you value Alex as a colleague, and our shared values of our institution is diversity and inclusive language, and you've demonstrated this in the past. So connecting it to your shared values, which is really important because your organization has those. And then what is the effect? So what is the impact of the action, particularly if it escalates or continued? And so in this conversation, I shared that it's important that Alex feels included, and we demonstrate an inclusive culture because we reach our students and our clients, and we want to model this behavior so we could also do this work in our community. And last but not least is, instead of me telling Sam what they should do, I asked them, what are your thoughts on where we go from here? Like, what are you going to do differently? And it was just really holding that mirror in front of that individual to be like, yeah, I did that. And oh goodness, I need to do a better job of ensuring that I am using the correct pronouns for Alex. And Alex and Sam had a lot of trust. And so Sam said, hey, I'm going to actually visit with Alex and just apologize that we worked together for several years and I was defaulting back to previous pronouns, and then move through the world a little bit differently than previously. So you could see that that's probably a normal situation that has taken place in our workplace. So what I want to do now is I want to take a little bit of time to do a little bit of homework and apply WRAP versus your sandwich and embedding your shared values. And so hopefully you all still have that shared values document. Okay, and then I'm going to add a scenario activity. So you should have that in a PDF. Awesome, and if you want to open that up, on your screen. Let me know if anybody has a problem with that. So on this PDF, you're going to have the WRAP acronym in what's on our slide here because you won't have access to view that during a breakout. And then I have 3 different scenarios that you and a group, a team can go through and work through. So you can first choose the one that speaks most to you. I don't want to assign those because I want you to actually work through something that within your group makes sense for you to work through. And we're going to spend about, 12 to 15 minutes in a breakout room. So if you get through one scenario, please go on to your second one. And then we're going to come back in a group after you've applied WRAP and share how that would work within your organization or institution. Does that make sense to everyone? Is that good? Awesome. Great. Amanda, could you break the group? And it seems like there's 5 participants, and so maybe one group of 3 and one group of 2. And please, everyone, you can pick whatever scenarios that work for you that speak to you.
Awesome. Okay.
So any questions before I take that away? Okay, I think we're good, Amanda. So whenever it works for you to launch those
Awesome.
breakout rooms, we'll
Okay.
get too.
Awesome. Okay. I'm going to open them for 13 minutes and then there will be a 60-second countdown. So 14 minutes.
Welcome back.
Thanks.
What scenario did you tackle? What's your group tackle?
We started with, we did all 3 basically, but we started with number 3 because we're both managers. So we kind of took that approach to it for sure. But we talked a little bit about the other 2 as well.
Awesome. Thank you. And I really wasn't unsure what the group dynamics look like as far as colleagues, managers in the group. And so I tried to write them so we all had something that would really reflect our role in the organization. Yeah, for sure. I think they were really great scenarios to talk through for me and Jessica. Perfect. Well, welcome back, everyone. Thanks for taking a look at that. And so I will say that I recognize that our time is going to run out as we debrief this. But one thing I don't want to lose sight of that you all had a link to as we close out for the day. I want to make sure that inclusivity style guide is something that you have access to. I feel in my role, it's hard to keep up with changing language. And I have bookmarked this page to be knowing that it's a true resource that will continuously be updated, and it's a one-stop shop for everything as we move through. So I do think that your organization itself may come up with language, a style guide for language, or may have another reference that they do. But I think it is important to have a common set of language because a lot of the conflict, a lot of the feedback will be based around this too, as well as the shared value. So I just want to make sure that that is a resource that you're aware of that I plugged in there. So great, let's spend about 10 minutes debriefing this exercise. Did anyone want to tackle scenario number 1 first or have a conversation about that? And if not, we can always go to 2 and 3.
I feel like, sorry, number 1 was pretty relevant to what we're kind of, what we might go through. And I feel like even just with all of them, the ending of the whole WRAP thing is prompting. I think that'll really help a lot of people to really consider what they're doing and how it could affect people and how they can make better efforts to make people comfortable. So.
I'll repeat what Kristen said, which I really liked towards the end of our conversation for number one, was that the effect would be that we would not want someone feeling comfortable repeating microaggressions to coworkers that may eventually then lead to conversations that they have with survivors themselves.
Well, and in that scenario one, visiting about that is, do you feel that if you're a colleague to colleague, do you feel that you would be comfortable in that scenario using RAP, or would you go to your colleague supervisor and share? And so there's not a right answer. I mean, I think it depends on your relationship, but I just wanted to see how you all talked through.
Depends on the colleague, I guess.
Yeah.
And how I feel like that would be received.
Yeah, like if it's a colleague you have a strong relationship with and you feel like you can kind of predict what their reaction is going to be, and that is okay with you, like that's not too much emotional burden onto you, like I think that's appropriate. But if you're in the marginalized group that is experiencing the microaggression, I think that makes it a whole different scenario for me.
Thank you, Heather. And I think that's where the scenario number two has a different lens, where you're all colleagues, but one of your colleagues is in a marginalized population, and you can see that they're visibly affected by that. So that was a little bit a difference versus the first scenario was that person who was experiencing microaggressions, or perhaps not even, it was a conversation that may have not been directed to the individual survivor or your client, outside of that as well. So they're two very different situations. So in scenario number two, definitely calls a little bit more action on the individual who's there. So can someone share how they would address that situation?
I think we talked about kind of calling the initial coworker aside and talking to them about how it was visible that this person was uncomfortable when they said that, and but it also affected us as just people who support our coworkers and would like to continue that inclusivity in our workplace. Let's see. And then we went on to say that the effect was that it makes it hard for anybody in the team to feel supported by this person, or even build that strong trust.
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit about like the mix of education around like language and like being understanding, kind of like you were saying, that language is constantly changing, but that we do want to use the correct language, and that's not accurate and has an effect on someone who's a part of that community. And I really like linking it to like, this person was uncomfortable. I noticed this about this person. So it really stays with you. Like, I noticed this and I was also uncomfortable myself, or whatever. I think that's really helpful to make it personal without being like overly emotional.
Well, and another thing that you've brought up, or the team in reflecting about this has brought up, that I didn't share, but naturally works well when you're providing feedback in a situation like this, is using how it made you feel. Because the person you're providing that feedback or feed forward to, so we're looking, into the future, you can't argue with someone's feelings. That person is feeling the way they are feeling. And so anytime that you can share how it made you feel, or sharing like, it made me feel uncomfortable, the language that was being used. And I could visibly tell through body language that it was also making our colleagues feel uncomfortable. And I think that is really, really helpful that you all hit on, because people will argue with other statements that are provided, but feelings, there is no way. They can't dismiss, well, someone could dismiss your feelings, but hopefully not. And also thank you all for recognizing that language is changing. And particularly if your institution doesn't have, or your organization doesn't have like parameters on language use, and perhaps using outdated language, is that's the last time that they've received education or guidance on that. And I find that really, really quite a normal thing within our institution that I even work for as well, that we might be using language that was politically correct and appropriate 7 years ago, but language has vastly changed since then. So making sure that you're giving someone a positive intent that they're trying, but it's a lot to keep up on. All right, and last but not least, I know there was a couple of managers in the group, so they were able to tackle, or they really felt scenario number 3, which is something that I think I commonly see take place. So I'll turn it over to you all to share about that.
Oh, go ahead, Kristen.
Well, I was gonna say something that Amy said, because the 3 of us in the group were like, this is something that would be nice not to wait until later to fix. So how do we kind of fix this immediately? And Amy had a good idea of like just taking a 5-minute break and having a conversation with the person so that hopefully the rest of your meeting can be productive.
And this was another one where we talked about the prompting at the end of like, do you feel comfortable? Are you going to apologize to the person you interrupted? Like, are you going to make a concerted effort so that doesn't happen again? And like making sure the person recognizes the impact of the interruptions on their coworkers.
I would also add, like, as a supervisor, to just say, like, valid, you can have all of these thoughts on something. So maybe this is something that you and I have to discuss outside of like a 10-20 people meeting, to just make sure that all concerns are heard.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a common one too, is making sure that everyone has a voice at the table, and finding ways to ensure that, particularly if we have a work colleague who's over speaking, and it doesn't allow, or it has our other colleagues at the table shut down. So I think this is very much a common occurrence. And so thank you all for having some of those scenarios to work through some challenging conversations. And I'm thankful that I did research your website. I did provide some, or look in a little bit information that was provided to me too. So I wanted to make sure the scenarios were authentic to what you would all experience within your organization. And it sounds like at least something resonated with you all. So I appreciate that. And my goodness, our time here was so short today, but I hope that I didn't bombard you with information and you were able to pick up a tip or two to have those conversations, and really, really fall back on those shared values of your institution to have conversations to address conflict, and also provide feedback in a meaningful way, because you have such strong shared values, which is very impressive. Goodness. Well, Amanda, I'll turn it over to you to any housekeeping things.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jamie. Sorry, my internet is proving to be a little unstable, so I'm going to keep my video off. But I just want to say thank you all for joining. I will email the recording and the link to the Padlet where I'm keeping all of the presentation slides and scenarios and all of that jazz, as well as a monthly journaling prompt and a podcast recommendation. So I will get those all to you. And then we, as you know, have a bit of a break because of some sabbaticals and things and how this program laid out. So what I'll be doing is just communicating monthly to keep the group engaged and providing those prompts and leadership podcast recommendations and other resources. And then we pick this back up again in mid-August. So it'll be a while before we have another training, but I think we have successfully kicked off this program with a few good sessions, and hopefully the prompts and things keep you engaged. And I will just see everyone in mid-August.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.